The first question that I want to highlight here is what is the, you can see, do you think that the EU government and institutions are doing enough to promote open source in Europe? If someone is interested, please.
Yeah. Can I answer? Or
Yeah. Perfect. It's an open space.
Yeah, sorry. This is a subject we've been discussing quite a bit over the last 10 years with the French government, and more recently with the European Commission. We believe that there have been quite a lot of progress in this respect, but there are also some things that could be better or even a lot better. In France, there is this tendency to think that technology companies that emerge from France or even from Europe will never be a match for American companies. There are numerous examples of things that were invented in France or were invented in Europe. Some people say, for instance, that the internet was invented in France, and if you follow some logic, it's probably true. The first microcomputer has been invented in France. Same, if you follow a certain logic, it's true. And there are numerous examples like this. So the first question is this question of promotion. How do the institutions that have the power to promote the European technology and business ecosystem around cloud and open source, how can they do that, and will they do that? We have the words from the European Commission that this will happen since the proclamation or the decision that was published a few months ago. In France, it's a bit more complicated. We have fought very hard over the last 6 months just to have a small group, an OSPO, what we call, what everybody calls an OSPO, Open Source Program Office, in the French government. There used to be a small team of, I don't know, 10 people who were quite active in open source, open data, open standard, and so on. And 3 years ago, everyone went their own way. The group was dispersed, and there is only one guy currently who's still really working hard on this subject. And hopefully the group will start to grow again. So that's a small win, but overall it's not that big. And the problem, of course, is that just one guy or 3 person in the government can't do much. It has to be really done in every ministry, every large administration, every region, every large city in France, and of course across Europe, and with strong cooperation with all these open source programs. Okay, so that's the first point. And the second point is about this ideology that is, in our opinion, too pregnant in many decision makers, that open source is just free software that can be that's developed for pleasure or for I don't know, by communities, magical communities that produce open source software, and not by real companies. So we believe that a strong policy in Europe for the promotion of open source also must imply some ways to help the industry to gain more, for instance, more contracts in the public sector. That would be the first step, as I mentioned in my slide deck. So
okay, yes. Next, please. Are you agree? Another vision?
Yes, I have something to say. I think that the key issue to get open source software and the whole Gaia-X European cloud going is seed funding, is customers, the first customers. And the first customers need to be government. So what we need is the government committing to buying European wherever possible, and buying open source wherever possible, and really making it very difficult not to. If we don't do this for business, it's not interesting to, when you already have the hyperscalers there, it's not interesting for most use cases to buy this stuff. Whereas for critical infrastructure and for government, really it makes a lot of sense, and they can kickstart this. So I would like to see change in government procurement in this area.
Yeah, I would like to add, if possible, a little comment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No, I'm completely agree with Stefan view about the importance of having a IT companies building open source and helping those IT companies to build that open source. And just to add and comment about, okay, if governments would be the ones buying this thing, is this idea, forget this idea that open source is built by a fox of people in the spare time. They need to be aware there are companies doing that, and how government could buy Gaia-X, for example, who are the companies supporting that program, providing the services to the government. Because of course they can put money to build the thing, but then you need to ensure that there is a community of companies. I mean community of companies, not just a community of people by themselves building that thing. Otherwise, of course, it's a very good thing to promote people doing stuff paid by the EU government at the public funding. But if you're not building a sustainable ecosystem out of that, it's just something that hyperscalers have, as you call them, are gonna take the resources and go with it. That's my fair opinion here, I think.
Yeah, if I may. Yeah, I think it's only. I mean, I think there is a tension whenever we talk about this, and that links with your comment as well, Manrique, you talk about this concept of European open source. The very concept of calling something European open source, or whether that makes any sense or not. I think this your question, Jordi, links with that as well. It has to do with the this tension between. I mean, there's. It's a bit controversial sometimes, because there's a tendency to kind of approach this from a kind of a protectionist perspective. So you could say, yeah, European governments or institutions should prioritize investment, or should buy from European companies, or should buy European technology. So it's a delicate thing, because you always want to keep an open market, but then you also. I think we are mature enough as a community of countries and to recognize that we are way behind in some stuff. So it's not about creating new tariffs or making it impossible for non-European companies to operate in that market, or to compete. I see it more as to restore a kind of balance, kind of more reasonable balance to some market and a situation that's completely unbalanced. So it's not about being protectionist, it's about developing European capabilities and become a partner. So it's about competing it's competition among equals, and that's not the case now. But that also links with what Raquel has been mentioned about cooperation. I think that's very important, because it's not about, from the perspective of the European institutions or governments. And me as a European citizen, I wouldn't maybe understand why they're spending money on specific companies, although we could talk about industry champions and all that. But I would like to see how they're investing money in changing the mindset of European companies to cooperate more. And that's something that open source can be very useful for, and also as a didactic instrument as well, to teach companies to compete, but also to cooperate, so they can perfectly cooperate on developing a technology that's the best technology in the world for something. And they can also compete with different business models and different markets and different sectors, different countries, and they can do that at the same time. So it's not a contradiction, and that's something that open source demonstrates and has been demonstrating for a long time, that it's actually not just a practical tool for developing something quicker or more secure or whatever. It's not just about that. There's also a didactic approach and an element there, and also obviously a geostrategic. But I think the didactic element of open source, I think, is very important from a European perspective in terms of bringing some balance back to the market.
If you agree, we can go with the next question. Basically, how can open source be used to democratize access to edge computing? First volunteer, please. Okay, Raquel.
Hi, well, I cannot talk about it technically because it's not my expertise, but I can talk about the very fact of democratizing it and making it a sustainable perspective and dynamic, not only by the government to people and civil society and private sector industries, but also by the very sector of by the very private sector and the society. So what does this mean? So for example, when Alberto was talking about enhancing better public-private partnerships, one of the main challenges here is the fact that technologies, so open source, edge computing, cloud, and other technologies are implemented on the ground. And this means that it's not only up to the macro level of a state to decide how these technologies will be deployed, implemented, and supervised, if any, but as well, it's something up to the city councils. So this revolves around the role of cities. So for example, in the case of Spain, we have several cities such as Bilbao in the Basque country and Barcelona and Catalonia, which already belong to the Smart City Alliance, which is another story. But the point is that in this regard, it is true that the city councils have a role in this regard. And one of the main problems, one of the main challenges with this is the fact that there is no knowledge about the positive impacts of these technologies and the challenges that they represent, and the way in which civil society and social groups can work together, can work alongside the private sector to make all of these technologies a socially impactful tool for public services, for the democratization of even decision making in a city council, in a town hall. So in terms of democratizing, it is true that it can be democratized in terms of design, but when it comes down to execution, it still needs a greater participation by different stakeholders. So it's not only something about states, but also about city councils and all the members that belong to them. So this is the same debate as, for example, with smart cities, AI, facial recognition systems. So I think it happens. It is the same situation with open source software, especially because open source is something that can be utilized by a higher and greater number of people and actors.
Okay. Other people that doesn't participate. Or we can go with the next question.
Well, I mean,
okay.
Just very quickly. Well, I personally feel a bit uncomfortable sometimes with this concept of technology being a factor to democratize, but I mean, as I understand the question in connection with open source, I guess from our perspective, what we've seen is that the way edge computing is developing and the way it's being implemented on the ground from the perspective of offering these resources and this infrastructure to businesses and customers. I think that's a point where we have to be careful, and governments and institutions have to be careful as well in the way edge computing becomes a reality on the ground. So from our perspective, again, from the infrastructure perspective. So There are a number of projects now going on, and a number of alternatives if someone wants to actually become a nets provider. So there is actually an alternative, and there's an option right now that involves, for instance, for 5G providers. And so I'm sure he knows all these developments in the market. Some of the 5G providers now in Europe are partnering with hyperscalers to provide edge providers through their 5G network. So that creates as well, I mean, that creates as well kind of unexpected, or might create some kind of unexpected long-term dependencies or new forms of dependency on non-European technology and non-open source technologies. If that's, for instance, the path that some companies decide to follow for making more edge resources available to the public. So, I mean, there are some debates around the concept of edge computing, open source and edge computing, but also in the specific forms in which edge computing is being implemented by new edge providers, like, as I said, 5G providers and others. So I think we have to be careful as well with that.
Okay, and next here. What do you think? You know, in this case, Adam explains that data changes are in the core and privacy impacts directly. What do you think about data change and privacy issues or possible issues?
I can just give a quick answer, just to outline a paradox, because as the open source community, we're also interested in everything that can be open. So this includes, for instance, open data. And we see that open data is, for some kind of data, there is a strong incentive to open the data, try to build value at top of public data or open data. And at the same time, there are a lot of data that, on the contrary, needs to be completely secured and protected. And this includes, of course, personal data. In France, we've had an action against the French government over the last year about a project called the Health Data Hub. And the Health Data Hub is a project which is supposed to join the data from all the French hospitals and try to do something useful for the health of the citizen. And this was particularly important during the COVID pandemic. But the biggest problem with this project is that they choose an hyperscaler as a provider, Microsoft. And after consulting the French cloud ecosystem, and they now claim publicly, and even the president, Mr. Macron, claimed publicly that the French cloud ecosystem is not as good as Microsoft, and yeah, that's too bad, but that's the way it goes, and they have to make some choices, and they have to go with Microsoft. But the biggest problem, of course, is that Microsoft is an American company. There are American laws that make it that are a bit difficult to interpret, but according to some interpretation, the American companies may be mandated by the American government to try to intercept European data, including personal, private health data from French and other European citizens. So we believe that we went to the Court of Justice in this respect. We almost won, but they gave the government 18 months to comply and to try to find a European cloud provider for the project. So let's wait. It's been 9 months already, so we'll see at the end of the year what happens. But the thing is that if this regulation were really enforced, and if this principle of having only European providers to deal with European data, that would be a boost for the European software cloud and software industry. So hopefully this idea of mandating the use of local cloud technology to deal with very highly sensitive data will have a positive impact on the market.
Well, just a quick comment, Jordi, for, well, I believe, Stefan, what you're referring to, like non-EU countries tapping into European data, that is more, I would put it as the data theft, not as data exchange, no? If that's the case. For data exchange, I assume like it's mutually consent to exchange, and I think this is important for the data economy to exchange data. And a key for data exchange is to resolve the privacy issues. So I think, Jordan, these are all connected issues, in this question that you have put. And from a perspective of the lot of projects that we have been doing with the European Commission, privacy has been a major requirement in many calls for the past couple of years. So I do see emphasis on privacy issues especially related to citizens' data, how to anonymize, whether it's being used on the automated vehicles or being with the e-health records, wherever we are. I think we are required to anonymize, and so it cannot be just suggesting platform and solutions for how to process and analyze data, but anonymizing it is a requirement. So yes, data exchanges is needed for data economy, in my opinion. But of course, you need the privacy solutions along with that. They go hand in hand.
Yeah, I think one can see. I mean, the risks of that in the diagram that Adam showed, for instance, with the Gaia-X diagram, where you see this connection between the infrastructure and then these new common data spaces that are being created in Europe. But I mean, the whole thing of Gaia-X at the end is just to make those connections, like between the infrastructure you need, the applications you need, and the data, and all that can be in each of these components can be in different countries, and you have to make sure. Let's say you're using an artificial intelligence service by a company in Portugal, using some data from a data set from Austria, and you're using an infrastructure that's available in Ireland, for instance. So you have to make sure that all that is managed, just from making it easy for the user to do that and orchestrate all and automate all that, but also to make sure that everything is secure and privacy of all data, that data is guaranteed during the whole process. And you as a customer or user of Gaia-X or any other orchestrator don't need access to that data at all at any time, never. So that's something that should be embedded into any platform that makes these connections. So to be secure by design in that sense, I guess.
Okay, more comments we are in the last. This is the last question, please. If not, we can go with the last round. After 1 hour and near 20 minutes, it's about if you have to resume with a tweet the session for today. You can have 1 minute to think about. Please, in this case, we can go in order by the photo that we have here, and 1 tweet, please. We are going to take notes. And please, Stefan.
Yes, I think it was a very interesting discussion, and I'm very happy to see that there are so many different perspectives on this topic that are converging towards something that, in my opinion, can be quite positive. We have the technology, we are working on the regulation, we have some help from the institution. Of course, some of the mentalities need to be changed to promote the open source and technologies and European cloud a bit more. But if we work together, it can, in the medium term, it can probably lead to great results.
Okay, mentality to the change and work together. Perfect.
Yeah.
And next, Raquel.
Hi, yes, I will say that in a tweet, I will say that it's not only about regulatory leadership, it's as well about economic development and the society-centric implementation and the supervision, which is highly important, especially from the private sector, to make it sustainable in the long run.
Okay, not only regulatory issues, and we are talking about society challenges. Okay, and in this case, next, Jose Manrique, it's your turn.
Wow, in just one tweet. I would say without.
The idea is that you have some promotion after the event. Yeah, you have the work done.
Okay, thank you. No, I would say without support from the European Commission or from the European government, I would say, to the European open source ecosystem, there won't be any IT sovereignty at all. So for me, that's the key point. We need to support that ecosystem to build the real IT sovereignty.
Okay, support ecosystem. Perfect. Step 2, Alberto.
Yes. Well, again, I'll say I think the important thing from my perspective is that we have to find ways to promote and foster that collaboration even among competitors. And I see that's where I see the main role of open source in Europe at this stage, is to help us to change the mindset of organizations and governments, but also large companies in Europe that have to, I think they benefit from having a stronger commitment to open source, the open source solutions that they use, and the ones that are emerging in the continent as well. And I think one of the good things that the European Commission is doing in that sense is just to have this idea of using their funding to promote collaboration, not only between European open source vendors, but also with a larger community and ecosystem of companies and IT companies in Europe. So I think that's we're in the right track, but it will take time. But at least we have the kind of the political will is now kind of explicit and a strong political will to move towards that. So yeah, there's hope.
Okay, thanks. In this case, resume. Collaboration maybe sometimes competing, and other times not competing, not but collaborate. Okay. And Swipe, here is your turn.
Okay. Well, given the goals Europe has set for itself, I think open source tools, especially on the edge, is not just a good to have. It's a must have, in my opinion, given the technologies, the way they are evolving. And I will connect my comment with Jose Manrique and Adam's previous comment, how to support these open source communities, for having a complete IT ecosystem at the back, supported by the government. So
okay, it's a must to have open source tools and communities. It's a must. Perfect. Yes. And at the end, Adam Smith, it's your turn.
Okay, I think probably my name, Adam Smith, he's a famous economist. Yeah, so 300 years ago, Adam Smith, he was the guy who kind of made the concept of the market very clear to us. I think that when we look at the market for cloud computing, we have supply and demand. And if there is demand for digitally sovereign cloud, the market will take care of supply.
That's it. Okay, it's clear. The market will help us if
The market will only help us if
it's needed.
demand
If it's needed.
comes. Yeah,
Okay.
but you have to. I mean, the market is a natural dynamic, but if you don't have demand, there will be no supply. And so the going back to what I said before, the government needs to create demand, the initial seeding demand. Later on, once you have a healthy, vibrant European ecosystem, then the rest of the market will follow. But initially, you need demand from the government for it to work.
If I may add a small comment, if we only have to trust large companies in Europe to create this demand for digital sovereignty, it won't happen. They are quite happy right now to work with one of the big three vendors. They have three vendors to choose from, so even for them, it's the perfect situation. The government must act and must enforce laws, regulation, whatever, but it won't come from the large companies. It won't come from the market. It has to come from the political level.
Okay, thanks. I think it's clear and finished. And I think it's for today. I think it's covered. Main topics appear. Hot things to think about, or not only the panelists, the audience. And if we have the goal to be productive, I think that we have it's a coffee day for everyone. And thanks for your time today, panelists, attendees. And from my side, best regards from the kindred city of Barcelona. And that I'm sure that in next months, like we can have face-to-face meetings, and to enjoy it together. Okay, thanks. It's everything for today, and see you next time in Gaia-X activities related, or in our digital lives.